understand for the outside world. They cannot understand us. We cannot understand them. We are two different worlds.
Is there a term here for a wife to get along with a husband, to be sweet?
Is there a term?
To be sweet.
We just say keep sweet.
Keep sweet.
Keep sweet. That is our motto. Is keep sweet.
What does that mean?
It means sacrifice your selfishness to bless others.
The authorities believe part of that is to be abused.
No, I am not abused. I am not brainwashed. I am a human being with a heart. I am not abused. I am telling the truth. I'm happy.
Two people drove into Short Creek, Utah, in 2021. They weren't members of the community. They weren't law enforcement. They were a cult expert named Christine Marie and her husband Tolga Katas, a documentary filmmaker. And one of them was wearing a hidden camera. Now, I want you to understand something about Short Creek before we go any further. This is not a town in the conventional sense. There are streets, there are houses, there are schools, businesses, a post office. But Short Creek, straddling the Utah-Arizona border between the towns of Hilldale and Colorado City, has operated for most of its history as a closed world, a world with its own rules, its own authority structure, its own understanding of what is right, what is required, and what happens to people who ask questions. Christine and Tolga drove into that world. They stayed, they listened, they built relationships, and over the next several months, they documented what they found, what they witnessed, what members of the community told them on camera about what was happening inside. That footage was eventually handed to the FBI. It led to the arrest of a man who had spent 3 years convincing people that God had chosen him as a prophet. It resulted in 12 federal convictions. It put a man named Samuel Bateman in federal prison for 50 years. And it exposed something that the outside world had almost no knowledge of. A criminal conspiracy that had been operating in plain sight, protected by silence, by faith, and by a community that had spent generations learning how to keep its doors closed. This is the story of how that happened, how one man built a following from the ruins of another man's disgrace, how a community that had already survived one predator found itself sheltering another, and how two outsiders with a camera and a plan walked in and tore it down. This is The Missing Hour, Episode 5.
All of you are not going to survive the judgments.
I don't know exactly how to put it. Hitler.
You know, he's a narcissistic sociopath.
Samuel Bateman. We need to talk about the world he came from, because you cannot understand how he did what he did without understanding the community that made it possible. Short Creek is one of the oldest fundamentalist Mormon communities in the United States. It sits along the Utah-Arizona border, part in Hilldale, Utah, part in Colorado City, Arizona. Population roughly 7,000. Most of those residents have lived their entire lives within a few miles of where they were born. The Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the FLDS, has been the organizing force of Short Creek for decades. A quick piece of context: the mainstream Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, officially abandoned the practice of polygamy in 1890. It had to, largely to secure Utah statehood. Groups that refused to abandon it splintered. The FLDS was one of those splinter groups, and over the following century they built communities in remote areas of Utah and Arizona, places where the outside world's rules were harder to enforce. Short Creek is the largest of those communities, and for most of its history, the outside world let it govern itself. That is not a neutral statement. It is a failure of oversight, with consequences that have played out across generations. Children raised in Short Creek were educated within the community's own school system. Young women were often married as teenagers to much older men with little legal recourse because the marriages were spiritual, not civil. Men with multiple wives were openly practicing polygamy, a federal crime, and law enforcement mostly looked away. In 2006, the FLDS prophet Warren Jeffs was placed on the FBI's Most Wanted list. In 2011, he was convicted in Texas of sexually assaulting 2 girls. One was 12, one was 15. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 20 years. His conviction was supposed to change things, and it did, somewhat. The FLDS fractured without centralized leadership. Families began to leave. Questions that had never been asked openly were asked. But here's the thing about institutional abuse in closed communities. It does not end when the leader goes to prison, because the structure that enabled the leader, the hierarchy, the silence, the theology of absolute obedience to prophetic authority, those things don't disappear. They persist. They wait. They can be reoccupied. That is what Samuel Bateman understood, and that is what he exploited.
Do 14, 15, 16-year-old girls get married here?
We are talking about our children right now.
I understand, but does that happen here? Are 16-year-old girls married to older men here?
This is about our children.
If you'll just talk to
about our children.
Joseph Smith used the doctrine of divine revelation to legitimize the taking of many wives and spiritualized it as an essential doctrine of his Mormon religion.
Samuel Bateman was born and raised in Colorado City. He was FLDS from birth. He knew the language, the structure, the theology. He knew what authority looked like in that community, what it sounded like, how it was claimed, how it was maintained. Around 2019, in the years after Jeffs' conviction had created a genuine leadership vacuum, Bateman began making a specific claim. He told people that Warren Jeffs was either dead or had been spiritually translated, and that God had communicated to Bateman directly, that Bateman was now the prophet, the rightful continuation of the priesthood authority that Jeffs had held. Let's pause on that for a moment, because from the outside, this sounds obviously absurd, but in a community built entirely around the concept of prophetic revelation, where the prophet's word is literally understood as the word of God, the framework for evaluating this claim is very different from what you or I would apply. In the FLDS world, challenging a prophet's claim to authority is not treated as healthy skepticism. It is treated as apostasy, as spiritual failure, as the kind of defiance that has eternal consequences. So when Bateman made his claim, the question members of the community faced was not simply, "Do I believe this man?" It was, "What happens to me and my family if I'm wrong to disbelieve?" That is how coercive religious systems work. They don't operate primarily through physical force, though that is sometimes present. They operate through the manipulation of belief, through the creation of a world where doubt itself is dangerous. Bateman was not a physically imposing figure. He was not eloquent in a charismatic preacher sense. Former followers describe him as quiet, persistent, and deeply fluent in the specific doctrinal language of the FLDS. He started small. He gathered a handful of families around him. He performed what he called spiritual marriages. He accumulated what he called wives, positioning these relationships as sacred, as divinely ordained, as obligations rather than choices. And then he asked male members of his group to give him their daughters. Some of them did, not because they didn't love their daughters, not because they were monsters in the simple sense of the word, but because in the framework they had lived their entire lives inside, a prophet's divine instruction supersedes a father's protective instinct. That is the mechanism. That is how it worked. And understanding that mechanism, understanding how deeply belief can be weaponized, is, I think, essential to understanding why this case matters beyond the individual crimes of one man. By 2022, Bateman had assembled more than 20 people he called his wives. Federal prosecutors would later establish that at least 10 of them were minors. The youngest victims were children. The community knew, and the community was silent.
Come over here, please. I'm gonna get that knife off you, sir, okay? Yeah. Any other weapons on you? Okay. Come over here, please. Nothing else on you? Phones? What's that reach in your pockets? What's your name, sir? What's that? What's your name, sir? Samuel. Samuel? No, what are you saying about pockets? Do you have any other weapons on you? Please don't reach in your pockets. Just let me know.
How many other people in the truck? How many other people are in the truck? Well, I just want to know who's inside the truck right now, so that way I know who else we're dealing with here. Or else I'm going to call everybody out.
As you can see, it's a pretty serious deal here, sir. What is your name? Samuel what?
Is he the driver?
Yeah.
Okay, you have to identify yourself. You understand that, right?
I don't know. I'm just wondering. Yeah, Samuel Bateman. Samuel Bateman. What are you doing? We're trying to...
Samuel, I just got here. Explain to me what's going on.
Calm down first. I am calm. You're being videoed. It's just in case yeah, you're being videoed as well.
Stuff?
Samuel Bateman, what's your date of birth? Let's run him. What is your date of birth, sir? I'm not sure.
Christine Marie had been studying closed religious communities for years. She was not a journalist, not a federal agent, not a lawyer. She was someone who had spent a significant portion of her adult life trying to understand, and in some cases, help dismantle, the systems that allow groups like the FLDS to operate. Her husband, Tolga Katas, was a documentary filmmaker. He had the equipment, the patience, and the specific skill set that undercover documentary work requires. Together, they made a decision that most people would not make. They moved to Short Creek, not for a weekend, not for a few weeks. They embedded themselves in the community over an extended period, building relationships slowly, in the careful, deliberate way that genuine trust is built. This is not glamorous work. It involves showing up consistently over months, being present without being threatening, listening far more than you speak, finding the people who are beginning to ask questions, and creating a space where those questions can be asked. What Christine and Tolga documented, I want to be precise about what this means. They captured footage inside a community that had been essentially closed to outsiders for decades. They spoke with community members who described, on camera, what was happening inside Bateman's group. They witnessed, firsthand, the mechanisms of control, the isolation, the theological coercion, the way doubt was suppressed and compliance was enforced. And when they had gathered enough, they handed what they had to the FBI. The FBI affidavit filed at the time of Bateman's arrest in September 2022, a public document, directly references Christine Marie and Tolga Katas as sources who provided information to federal investigators. That is not a minor detail. In federal criminal cases, especially in cases involving closed communities that are structurally designed to resist investigation, civilian intelligence is often the difference between a case that gets built and a case that never happens. Without Christine and Tolga, it is genuinely unclear whether the investigation that led to Bateman's arrest would have developed in the way it did, on the timeline it did. In September 2022, federal agents moved simultaneously on multiple properties linked to Bateman's group. When they arrived at one location, they found 3 young girls in Bateman's trailer. Those girls were taken into protective custody. And here is where the case, which was already extraordinary, became something else entirely. Because some members of Bateman's group, after the arrests began, attempted to remove those girls from state custody. They drove them across state lines. before investigators located them and brought them back. That act, the attempt to recover the victims after law enforcement had intervened, became a separate strand of the federal case. It added kidnapping charges. It implicated additional followers. It demonstrated that the conspiracy did not simply collapse when Bateman was arrested. It tried to survive.
Body camera video shows the moments authorities pulled over this truck and trailer in Flagstaff. The reason why?
Saw fingers poking out of the trailer.
With guns drawn, they open the doors.
See the hands!
Finding 3 young girls.
How old are you? 14. How old are you? 11? How old are you? 12?
Also inside the trailer, a couch, camping chairs, and a makeshift toilet. When they tried questioning the girls, this woman in the maroon dress stepped in.
Basically telling them all.
Then one of the officers noticed.
The 14-year-old, she had a ring on her finger, on her ring finger. They've all kind of like hidden those. I mean, we know what's going on.
Let me walk you through what the federal case actually looked like, because I think this is the part of the Bateman story that most coverage compresses into a sentence or two, and it deserves more than that. The initial indictment after Bateman's September 2022 arrest was significant, but it grew. In December 2022, a first superseding indictment added kidnapping and conspiracy to commit kidnapping charges against Bateman and 3 female followers who had been involved in attempting to remove the girls from state custody. In May 2023, a second superseding indictment added further charges: conspiracy to transport a minor for criminal sexual activity, conspiracy to travel across state lines to engage in illicit sexual conduct with a minor using a means of interstate commerce to persuade or coerce a minor, interstate travel with intent to engage in illicit sexual conduct, and production of child pornography. The scope was multi-state: Arizona, Utah, Colorado, Nebraska. This was not a local crime. It was a federal conspiracy with geographic reach, which is partly why the U.S. Attorney's Office in Arizona, not local law enforcement, prosecuted it. In April 2024, Samuel Bateman pleaded guilty. 2 counts: conspiracy to commit transportation of a minor for criminal sexual activity, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. As part of the plea deal, the remaining charges were dropped. His attorney, Brian Russo, filed a sentencing memorandum arguing for a maximum of 20 years. He cited a psychiatric evaluation finding Bateman mentally ill and delusional. That Bateman genuinely believed his own prophetic claims. That this delusion, however harmful, mitigated his culpability to some degree. The prosecution's response was direct. Bateman had treated his victims, they wrote, like property, like chattel. The harm he had caused, the years stolen from the young women and girls in his group, the destruction of their ability to simply ask what they wanted to be when they grew up, could not be mitigated by a diagnosis. Belief, the prosecution argued, is not a defense for abuse. On December 9, 2024, U.S. District Judge Susan Brnovich sentenced Samuel Bateman to 50 years in federal prison, followed by lifetime supervised release. She called him, and I want to read this exactly, the worst kind of abuser. But Bateman was one of 12. Let me tell you about the others. Liddell J. Bisline Jr. received a life sentence. He had provided 2 of his own daughters to Bateman. The younger was 9 years old at the time. For 3 years, he participated directly in the abuse. He was not a peripheral figure. He was a central one. Torrance Bisline, convicted at trial, not by plea. Prosecutors established that he had funded the operation and participated in what they described as an atonement ceremony involving a 14-year-old girl. He was sentenced to 35 years. Maroney Johnson pleaded guilty to conspiring to transport 4 underage girls across state lines for sexual activity, sentenced to 25 years. Several younger women, some of whom had themselves been victims of the system from childhood, were also convicted for their roles in the attempt to remove the children from state custody after the arrests. One of them, Moretta Rose Johnson, was 19 when she was arrested. Her attorney argued she should have been treated as a victim from the beginning. She was sentenced to time served. 12 convictions in total, sentences ranging from time served to life, and every single one of them traceable in some meaningful way back to 2 civilians who moved to Short Creek with a camera.
Johnson reportedly admitted to encouraging his young daughters, ages 9 to 14 years old, to marry Bateman after Bateman said it was part of God's will. The document writes Johnson told his 9-year-old daughter that the Lord wanted her to go with Bateman. Within just a few months, Johnson's young daughters were married to Bateman, with Johnson's full consent. Documents claim Johnson, while on a group call that was uploaded to YouTube, said he surrendered his kids to Bateman. We found a copy of that audio on YouTube.
They do belong to Father Samuel. What he chooses to do with them is his business, and I rejoice in it.
Johnson also said he knew that these illegitimate marriages would lead to Bateman having sex with the minors. Johnson then admitted to helping Bateman transport the child brides to multiple states where they would engage in group sex acts. In some cases, documents claim Johnson would be in the room with his daughters and Bateman and watch them being sexually abused by Bateman.
My name is Lorraine Jessup. I haven't seen my kids since February 4th of 2023.
My name is Sarah Johnson. My son Salome has been missing since March of 2021.
My name is Miranda Johnson, and I haven't seen or heard from my son since October 29th, 2022.
My name is Elizabeth Roundy. I have not seen my daughter Elintra since January 1st, 2023.
I want to give you 2 details that don't usually appear in the same paragraph of coverage. The first, Samuel Bateman, from inside federal prison, has continued to contact his remaining followers. Daily phone calls through approved prison communication channels, still presenting himself as the prophet, still claiming divine authority, still apparently finding people willing to answer. The second, Faith Bisline, a community member whose relatives were among those affected, told a CBS affiliate in August 2024 that the survivors were doing better. They're in school, she said. They have all decided they do not believe in Sam Bateman anymore, and they want to live their own life. She paused, and then she said, "What do I want to be when I grow up?" These are things they didn't get while they were there. Those 2 details, side by side, tell you almost everything about the nature of what happened in Short Creek. On one side, a man in federal prison, still reaching out, still trying to maintain his hold, because the belief that he is a prophet, his own belief and the belief of whoever still answers his calls, does not end at a sentencing hearing. On the other side, young women and girls in school asking questions about their futures, discovering that futures, plural, branching, genuinely open, are something they are allowed to have. The gap between those 2 realities is enormous, and it is worth sitting with. Because one of the things this case raises that I think is genuinely important and not discussed enough is the question of institutional responsibility. Samuel Bateman operated for 3 years, in a community that had already been the subject of federal investigation, in a community where the FLDS had already produced 1 convicted predator who was serving life in prison, in a community where the structural conditions for exactly this kind of abuse, prophetic authority, isolation from outside oversight, theological coercion, were already well understood by law enforcement. And yet, 3 years. The answer is partly that closed communities are structurally difficult to investigate. That prophetic authority creates a system where victims don't self-identify as victims. That Short Creek had, by 2019, been the subject of so much law enforcement attention that the community had become even more insular, even more resistant to outside intervention. But it is also partly that investigating these communities consistently requires resources, sustained attention, and civilian cooperation that doesn't always materialize. Christine Marie and Tolga Katas provided that cooperation. The FBI acted on it, but the question of why it took civilian infiltration to bring this case forward, rather than the sustained institutional oversight that should have been in place, is one that nobody has fully answered. Christine and Tolga, after everything they documented, after everything they handed to federal investigators, still live in Short Creek. They continue working with the FLDS community. The work, they have said in interviews, is not finished. And looking at what Samuel Bateman was still doing from a federal prison telephone, calling his followers daily, claiming divine authority, it is very difficult to argue with them.
I'm looking at the revelation that Warren sent out, according to the heavenly calendar that will exist in New Jerusalem. Translated people must die.
What does it mean?
Whatever Warren Jeffs means by it, I don't want to wait and find out and see.
If Warren Jeffs were to command people to be translated, in other words, die so that they could go to heaven, the faithful FLDS may well do that.
Jeff's also calling for all children of former FLDS members to come back into the fold.
And after that revelation, several FLDS children have mysteriously gone missing.
We rejoice in you in the privilege of being under our prophet's direction, and the privilege of being taught how to come to you through him.
I've got a brother-in-law who once told my sister, he says, if the prophet told me to, I'd slit your throat without even thinking about it.
Is serving 50 years in federal prison. Liddell J. Bisline Jr. is serving life. Torrance Bisline is serving 35 years. Maroney Johnson is serving 25 years. 8 more people convicted. Sentences ranging from time served to decades. 12 in total. The survivors, the young women and girls at the center of this case, are not named in this video. They are not identified. Their privacy matters more than the completeness of any documentary account. What Faith Bisline said about them, that they are in school, that they want to know what they want to be when they grow up, is, I think, the most important sentence in this entire story. That question, what do I want to be, is something most of us take completely for granted. The fact that these young women are getting to ask it now is not a small thing. Netflix's Trust Me. The False Prophet is streaming now. It is beautifully made. It gives Christine Marie and Tolga Katas significant time to tell their story in their own words. I would genuinely recommend watching it alongside this video. Their account of what it felt like to be inside that community, to witness what they witnessed, is something a narrated documentary can only approximate. The link to Christine and Tolga's ongoing work with the Short Creek community is in the description. If this case raised questions for you about prophetic authority, about institutional oversight, about how communities protect themselves from accountability, I'd genuinely like to know. Drop them in the comments. This is the kind of case that rewards more thought, not less. The next video I'm putting out is one that almost nobody on YouTube has covered yet. A woman disappeared in Spain after meeting a social media content creator. She was 42 years old. Her case was handled as a missing persons report for months. It was not a missing persons case, and the way investigators finally identified what had actually happened involves a detail so specific, so almost impossible to believe, that I've been thinking about it since I first read the case file. That video goes up this week. Subscribe. You won't want to miss it.